Good afternoon and welcome to the Cannabis Regulatory Commission's pre-application webinar. To kick things off is Commissioner Del Cid Coso.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello, I'm Commissioner Maria Del Cid Coso and welcome to the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission pre-application webinar. Before we get started, I would like to offer a brief recap of the various steps and milestones that we've accomplished in the last 7 months. Since the establishment of the CRC, we held various public meetings where we have the ability to hear the concerns, views, and recommendations from public members and invited guests. Commissioners met and continues to speak with various stakeholders, including municipal leaders, advocates from New Jersey and other jurisdictions, elected officials, and more. On August 19th, 2021, the CRC crafted and adopted initial regulations ahead of the August 21st deadline set in statute. Following the adoption of these initial regs, on October 13th, the CRC held a live statewide informational webinar where the initial rules were explained in greater detail and questions from the public were answered. At our last public meeting, scheduled on November 9th, the CRC adopted Resolution 2021-17, the approval of notice of application acceptance. That notice came 260 days after Governor Phil Murphy signed PL 2021, Chapter 16, known as the CREAM Act, into law. As member of the inaugural commission, I am proud to say that the CRC will now begin the historic process of accepting applications for recreational cannabis businesses and testing labs in a manner that will ensure a safe and equitable cannabis industry in our state. We plan this webinar with the goal to help facilitate and make the application process as smooth and effective as possible for prospective applicants. I would like to remind you all that we have resources available on our website in various languages, including Spanish. Please be sure to review all FAQs on our website, the information webinar from October 13th, and our regulations and the notice of application acceptance prior to submitting your application. Potential applicants and stakeholders can always submit questions about the application process, whether it's about the regs or eligibility, to the following email: crc.licensing@crc.nj.gov. Again, that email is crc.licensing@crc.nj.gov. Thank you for joining us today. And now I will turn it over to our Executive Director, Jeff Brown.
We are here to talk to you about the notice of application acceptance that the Commission approved at the November meeting, and more broadly, the regulations that underlie that notice and the CRC's licensure process. Today, we are going to cover a number of items. But specifically, we're going to go over an overview of the notice of application acceptance, timeline, license types, application priority and scoring, expectations for application review, forms and the application system itself, and frequently asked questions. Before we get started, I want to stress a few key points about this process compared to how permits have been issued in the past for medical cannabis under the Department of Health. This is not a request for applications in the traditional sense. There's not going to be a pool of applicants to be judged as a single group. The Commission is going to accept applications on a rolling basis. Applications will be scored against the rubric in the notice of application acceptance. In order to be moved forward in the licensing process, applications will need to be complete, be fully compliant with qualification and limitation provisions in our regulations, and receive a full score for all mandatory measures required of the specific application type. Importantly, licensed applicants will not be issued a license until they've met all the requirements for licensure. Applicants will be reviewed, scored, and approved in accordance with the priority laid out in the notice, which I'll cover in greater detail today. But there are stages of the application process that will be dependent on the applicants themselves and how quickly they can complete them, like fingerprinting, any required probity investigations, and any documents requested by Commission staff. To begin, we'll discuss the notice of application acceptance itself. The notice of application acceptance includes eligibility requirements, notes and specifics on the prioritization process, application requirements, including forms and what supporting documents licensed applicants and persons of interest may be required to submit, scoring criteria, and then details on approval and denial determinations. What the notice of application does not include are details about the ATC certification process, alternative treatment centers, can certify to the commission that they have enough cannabis on hand and can meet the operational requirements to begin selling recreational or personal use cannabis. But that is not covered by this notice of application acceptance. In fact, ATCs cannot submit via this process. That is covered by a separate set of guidance. Distributors, wholesalers, and delivery services are also not included in this notice. They will be included in future regulations and future notice. The notice of application acceptance provides additional clarity on local approval and municipal preference. Specifically, it notes what applicants need in letters and resolutions of support, when a letter or a resolution of support is appropriate, and what counts as municipal preference. So municipalities can submit their preference to the commission, and importantly, there needs to be consistency between the two. Some of the highlights: there's no deadlines. This is a continuous rolling application process and will be continuous until the notice is updated. There's no limit on the number of licenses covered by this notice, except a limit of 37 cultivation licenses, which can be issued prior to February 22nd, 2023. I'll also note that although there's no limit established by the commission at this time, municipalities can establish local limits, and in fact, license applicants may be subject to those depending on the municipality that they're choosing to try to locate within. Some of the things that are required of all applications: a completed and submitted online application, and I'll cover the online application submission system later in this presentation. The entity's legal name, a valid business registration certificate, federal and state tax ID numbers, disclosure of all persons of interest and all entities of interest, a proposed location and landlord contact information, personal history disclosures for all persons of interest, and criminal history background checks. We also ask for business formation documents, entity disclosure for any entities that meet certain criteria. And then if an applicant is using a management services contract or financial sources, we ask for disclosure of any management services agreements or financial source agreements. There's also additional requirements as provided in the notice. So please review the notice itself prior to submitting an application. As far as timeline, applications will begin accepting applications on December 15th, 2021 at 9 a.m. And that includes Class 1 cultivator licenses, Class 2 manufacturer licenses, and for testing laboratories. Applications will be accepted starting on March 15th, 2022 at 9 a.m. for Class 5 retailers. Importantly, the application system itself opens on December 15th, 2021 at 9 a.m. There's not going to be early access, so you'll need to access it beginning at 9 a.m., fill out your application, and then submit. So what can applicants expect in advance according to this timeline? A tutorial on utilizing the application website. The required forms, those will be posted to our website in advance of the beginning of the application period. That includes the personal history disclosures and entity disclosure forms. FAQs. So following this webinar, we'll post frequently asked questions on our website regarding the application process, and those will be constantly updated. Importantly, once the application system is open, potential applicants may be able to submit other application types beyond what we've specified we are accepting at a given time. But any application received prior to a noticed beginning of an application acceptance period will be rejected. So if you submit an application or try to submit an application for a Class 5 retailer before the beginning of that period, it will be rejected. So the types of licenses covered in this notice are Class 1 cultivators, Class 2 cannabis manufacturers, Class 5 cannabis retailers, and testing laboratories. Additional classes of licenses are not covered in this notice and therefore are not eligible to submit applications and will not be considered at this time. Applicants can choose which type of license to apply for based on their readiness to begin cannabis operations. Importantly, there's two types of licenses available. These are established in statute and further delineated in our regulations. These are the conditional license, which is a provisional license with an abbreviated application process that gives applicants more time to get things like property or municipal approval. And then there's an annual license, which is a full license, and that allows applicants to begin operations and get licensed after passing CRC inspections. In this process, conditional applications are prioritized over annual applications in the application process. Conditionals license holders, if approved, will have up to 5.5 months to apply to convert to an annual license. And that's via a conditional conversion application, which is covered in this notice. Importantly, a conditional license applicant does not need site control or municipal approval. We do ask that they have an identified site, but that can change. That can change in the conditional license application phase. But just for the application, and because they do only have up to 5.5 months to convert to an annual license to submit an application to convert, we ask that they have a site identified. For annual licenses, those are, according to priority, reviewed after conditional applications. They have to undergo a full application process as outlined in regulations and the notice of application acceptance. And they do require site control, municipal approval, and other requirements. So really, in our regulations, in statute, in this notice, there are two paths to full licensure for cannabis businesses. There's the conditional application, and that begins coming in as a conditional license applicant. If approved, that applicant would then move on to a conditional license phase where they have to do things like establish site control, establish municipal approval, and submit an application for conditional conversion. And then if approved, they would then receive an annual license. Similarly, applicants can submit an annual license application, which is one application process, but is not prioritized. Conditional applicants, both for initial licensure and as conversion applicants, are prioritized over annual license applicants, but applicants have the option to submit via either route. Importantly, only license holders holding an annual license, either through a conditional conversion application or an annual license application, will be legally able to cultivate, produce, manufacture, transfer, or dispense cannabis and cannabis items. You have to get to that annual licensure, which you can do either via the conditional process or the annual process, but you have to get to that annual license issuance in order to legally cultivate, produce, manufacture, transfer, or dispense, or do any of the other activities associated with the actual possession and sale of cannabis and cannabis items. There's two possible business sizes or categories, I should say. There's micro businesses and standard businesses. Cannabis businesses can choose between those two categories. Micro businesses have to adhere to size and volume regulations. So micro businesses can have no more than 10 employees. They can have a facility no bigger than 2,500 square feet and can possess no more than 1,000 cannabis plants in a given month, or have a volume that exceeds 1,000 pounds per month in the case of a Class 5 retailer or Class 2 manufacturer. Standard businesses are not subject to micro business limits. They can have more than 10 employees and they can have more than 2,500 square feet of facility space. One important thing to note here in our regulations, we do specify that for micro businesses, that 2,500 square feet is the physical plant of the business. So that includes the areas that are actually used for the operations of the business, not if it's on a very large property, that's okay. The applicant can specify what the physical plant of that business is, but it's got to be inclusive of all areas that are involved or related to their cannabis operations. So moving on to priority and scoring. As I mentioned, applications will be reviewed, scored, and approved in accordance with a priority specified in our regulations and in more detail in the notice of application acceptance. Conditional applications and conditional conversion applications are always reviewed before annual applications. And then within each of those categories, applications will be reviewed in according to this priority level. So first, the highest priority are social equity business applicants, then diversely owned business applicants, then impact zone business applicants, then applicants who receive bonus points for collective bargaining agreements, project labor agreements, or residency, and then finally all other applicants. And within each of those categories, micro business applications get reviewed, scored, and approved before standard business applications. So again, conditional applications are always reviewed before annual applications. Social equity business applicants have the highest priority within both conditional and annual. If you don't qualify for any of those categories, then you don't have a priority and you're just in the all other applicants pool. And then micro business applications are prioritized within each of those categories. So we've received some questions as to when priority is assessed. It's really assessed at 2 points in the process. Prior to review and scoring, so that's at the onset of the application process, applicants will be moved in accordance with that priority for the initial review and scoring, and then once again when they reach the approval stage. There are two categories of businesses here that it's worth delving into a little bit, and we've covered these in our informational webinar. We covered these in previous commission meetings, so I highly recommend potential applicants review those resources, review our website for details on these. But social equity businesses are created by CRC rules, and you can qualify as a social equity business by either meeting certain residency standards, so living in, having residency in an economically disadvantaged area for 5 of the last 10 years, and income requirements, so also being under 80% of the median household income, or the majority of the ownership of the licensed applicant must have prior cannabis related convictions. So that's either 2 or more disorderly persons or misdemeanor offenses, or 1 felony or indictable offenses related to cannabis. If you meet those criteria, then you can qualify as a social equity business. And I'll note that we now have the full list of economically disadvantaged areas as designated in our regulations on our website. Please review those. They're by zip code. You can go to our website and see whether or not your zip code qualifies. Second level of priority here is related to where one lives or chooses to locate, or where they choose to employ from our impact zone businesses, and those are established in legislation. And there's 3 ways to qualify as an impact zone business. You either need to be located in an impact zone, or the majority ownership lives or has of the business, the licensed applicant has lives or lived in an impact zone for 3+ years, or the licensed applicant pledges to employ and actually does employ, if operational, 25% of the business's employees from an impact zone. So moving on to scoring, one of the key features of our new application process is pass-fail scoring. Applications are going to be deemed complete and compliant with notice and regulations, and if they are deemed complete and compliant, then they're going to receive full points. Incomplete applications, or those that are not compliant with the notice or regulations, will receive no points and will be rejected. But those applicants will have an opportunity to cure their applications and resubmit. Either a response passes and receives full points, or it's deficient. All measures, except for bonus categories, must receive scores to move forward. So essentially, and this is covered in the notice, for each type of license application, applicants will need to score full points in order to move forward. So they'll need to be deemed, they'll need to have their responses be deemed complete and compliant for each of their the scored sections in order to move forward in the licensure process. In order to pass, applicants must adequately address every requirement in the notice and corresponding regulations. This is important because for a number of the scoring criteria in the notice, we're asking licensed applicants to submit SOPs for how they will comply with various parts of our regulations. We're going to be looking at those responses and going back to our regulations and making sure that every regulatory requirement is addressed in those SOPs that are submitted pursuant to that section. Similarly, the notice covers what needs to be submitted in the other scored sections, and we're going to be looking at what's submitted against what's in the notice, what's in our regulations, and what's in statute, because there are some parts of the application that come from statute. In the notice itself, there's a section that spells those out, but you can see those in the statute as well. And again, in order to pass, applicants must adequately address every requirement in the notice and corresponding regulations. So moving on to expectations for application review. We do expect to receive a high volume of applications once application acceptance opens up on December 15th. By statute, the commission has 90 days to review applications, but can extend if more time is required. It is very likely that the commission will need to extend in the early days due to volume. Our goal is to get to that 90-day turnaround, but I do expect that given the volume we expect to receive, that at least initially, we're probably going to be looking at more than 90 days for review. I'll also note that there are going to be parts of the application process that will be on the applicant to complete. The full components of the application process are the application submission itself, review and scoring by the commission, a criminal history background check, qualification and investigation into whether or not an applicant meets the qualification requirements that are established in our regulations, probity if necessary, and I'll cover that a little later in this presentation, review for regulatory compliance, approval by commission, and then for annual and conditional conversion applicants who will be receiving a annual license, a final inspection, and then license issuance. So importantly, the actual issuance of a license, it comes at the end of this process. Applicants will need to submit their application. Following that initial review, they'll need to comply with the criminal history background check, comply with any requests for documents due to probity or a qualification investigation. There will need to be a review by commission staff for compliance with the notice, with regulations, a recommendation for approval to the commission itself, and then for licensed applicants that are again going for either an annual license or that conditional conversion application that will get them an annual license as well, a final inspection to show that they're operationally ready to begin cultivating, manufacturing, dispensing, or testing cannabis, and then the license issuance itself. So for qualification, I urge applicants to again review our regulations on this, but the big pieces are a criminal history background check, and that will come after initial license submission, but it'll come before approval. There will be a review for statutory compliance. So if a licensed applicant is submitting as a social equity business, an impact zone business, or a diversely owned business, then we'll review those to make sure that they actually comply with those specifications. Make sure applicants comply with the specifications and the requirements for conditional applicants, which have income thresholds, micro business applicants, which have residency requirements. They have to live in either the municipality. The majority of the ownership have to live in the municipality they seek to locate in, or a neighboring municipality, and then compliance with the ownership limitations that are established in our rules. And then finally, probity if required by investigative staff. So for probity, at its discretion, the commission may investigate and may conduct a probity review of the licensed applicant, its owners, principals, and related entities and their finances, ownership, and control structure. Parties to an application that may require a probity review are owners, passive investors, principals, board members, management services contractors and financial sources, and some but not all vendor contractors. Some of the things that may be required for license applicants to submit, if required to go through probity, are IDs, diplomas, professional licenses, tax returns, business tax returns, W-2s, 1099 forms, and tax returns are required as a part of the application process, which I'll cover a little later. Potentially account statements for personal and business bank and investment accounts, real estate documents, business holdings, loans, liens, liabilities, history of litigation, for entities, a list of their shareholders, business formation documents, board meeting minutes, financial reports, and for those who operate in cannabis or other highly regulated industries in other states, history of fines and sanctions from other jurisdictions. We've received a lot of questions about our application review process and the statutory cap on cultivators for the first 2 years following enactment. And importantly, again, the cap on those 37 cultivators expires on February 22nd, 2023. So essentially, 3 months and a year from when this webinar is being taped and released. So I go back to our licensing process, and again, the actual issuance of the license is the last piece of this process. And so in order to be qualified as one of those 37 cultivators, a license applicant is going to have to go through the whole process. They will have to have been deemed ready for approval and approved by the commission, and then received a final inspection and be deemed ready for operations, and then actually receive that license and actually begin operating. So in order to be one of the 37, you need to go through the entire process and get to that license issuance stage as quickly as possible. And again, I'll note that in accordance with the priority established in the notice, conditional license applications will be reviewed before annual. Social equity business applications receive highest overall priority, followed by diversely owned businesses, then impact zone businesses, and finally those receiving bonus points, and then micro businesses within each category receive priority. Importantly, related to this provision, the statute says specifically that the commission shall not allow, providing there exist qualified applicants, more than 37 cannabis cultivators to be simultaneously licensed and engaging in cannabis production. That's an important distinction because in order to qualify as one of the 37, you need to be simultaneously licensed and engaging in cannabis production, which means in order to qualify, you need to have had that license issued and also be operating. And so again, a license applicant would need to have gone through that entire process in order to hit that, get licensed and be one of those 37. So now, before we get to Q&A, I'm going to touch on a little bit about the required forms and the application system itself. So in the notice of application acceptance and in our regulations, there are two forms that are referenced. One is the personal history disclosure form, and the other is the entity disclosure form. The personal history disclosure form is going to be very similar as the personal history disclosure form that was in use under the Department of Health. So if you submitted in either the 2018 or the 2019 RFA, you likely had to fill out a version of that. Every person of interest that qualifies is going to have to fill out a personal history disclosure form, look at the notice and regulations to determine whether or not you qualify there. But essentially, good rule of thumb, if you're a person of interest as part of this application process, you need to fill out a personal history disclosure form. And then entity disclosure forms, those are for entities of interest and the license applicant itself. So that's another form that will need to be filled out, but that's filled out at the entity level versus at the personal level. These forms will be available on our website prior to the beginning of the application period. So just check back our website for updates. You will be able to access those in advance of the application period and get those filled out. So for the application system itself, and before I get to this, I'll note I'm going to run through some very high level information and some screenshots. But I'll note that there will be additional information coming, additional tutorial documents on the application system in advance of the opening of the application period. We want to make sure that people are able to use this effectively and efficiently once it opens up. And so we're going to try to provide as much resources as we can to make sure that that happens. Importantly, this new application system, which was approved by the Commission several months ago, it's online digital applications. So we're not accepting paper applications. You have to submit via the online application system. It's a system that can be accessed by multiple team members and worked on together in a cloud-based, secure, and flexible environment. And again, this application system opens December 15th at 9 a.m. So I'm going to run through an application system snapshot so potential license applicants and stakeholders have an idea of what to expect. And again, then we will be releasing more information on this application system and how to navigate it. So this is a screenshot of the application system. Public users are going to need to register and create an account in the application system. Once registers, users have to verify their email addresses to continue. So much like, creating an account on any number of websites, you have to verify your email address. Once you've verified your email address, and this is a snapshot of the email you'll get to verify your email address. Once you've done that, then you can go and log into the system and begin your application. This is a screenshot of the public login screen. Once in the system, you can create a new application by selecting new business license from the menu. That will enable you to create a new application. You'll be required to submit any general information. And I'll note that these screenshots are very preliminary, and some of these will look a little different in the system itself, but we wanted to give a snapshot so that folks could get ready for what they'll need to submit. They'll have to submit license information. So pick the class of license you're submitting for, whether it's a class 1 cultivator, class 2 manufacturer, or class 5 retailer. I'll note again here, as I covered earlier in the webinar, applicants may be able to go through the process for an license type that we're not currently submitting or accepting applications for. Those will be rejected if they're submitted before the Commission is officially accepting license applications for that type. Applicants will have to submit information on persons of interest and entities of interest. It's all able to be done via a fillable form. Contact information, phone number, ownership percentage. Applicants, once they're in the system, can go through and fill out question by question what they're required to fill out. Primary contact person will need to be established for each application. Location information, including the physical street address of the business, the facility mailing address. There's questions that will need to be filled out, and then finally there's a place for uploading documents. And we ask that documents, whenever possible, be uploaded as PDFs. We'll have some additional information on document submission in advance of the application process, but there's an easy upload function here that applicants then can use to upload all required documents as part of the application process. And then finally, once an applicant has submitted everything that they need to submit, answered all the required questions, uploaded all the necessary documents, then you pay the application fee. And application fee is paid via credit card. In most cases, some cases via ACH. So the application system is programmed to note mandatory information, but that's not to say that applicants will not be able to submit if they're missing like a document they need to upload. But when it comes to the general information, when it comes to some of the questions in the application system, if you try to submit without filling out a piece of required information, it's going to tell you. When it comes to documents or some questions that may not apply to all applicants, you're going to need to make sure you follow the notice of application acceptance to determine which items you need to include in the application system itself. So, for example, a social equity applicant is going to have to submit information proving that they qualify as a social equity business. That's not going to be a required question for all applicants, but certainly for some. And it's the applicant's responsibility for making sure they submit everything that they need to, that they are required to submit as part of this process. Once an application is submitted, there's a dashboard where licensed applicants can check in on the status of their application. So I know in the past, frustration among applicants is that they can't go somewhere to see the status of their application. Well, with this new application system, licensed applicants will be able to do just that. They'll be able to go in and see what stage of the process, from a very high level, their application is in the system. Once the application is submitted, applicants will receive an email confirming that it's been submitted. That will give you verification that it is submitted and that the commission has that application. Once application has gone through the entire process and it's been approved and a license has been issued, that will be noted in the application itself. And in fact, the license itself, if that were to happen, if you make it through the entire process and get issued a license, will be accessible in the application system. So finally, we're going to go to Q&A, and the questions that I'm going to cover today are culled from questions that were submitted following our November meeting, at which the notice of application acceptance was approved by the commission and submitted before the deadline for submission, question submission noted at that meeting for inclusion in this webinar. As I stated before, we're going to have a set of frequently asked questions on our website that will be constantly updating. So if you did not get your question in advance of this webinar, that's not to say that it won't be answered. Please submit to crc.licensing at crc.nj.gov, and that will make it, we'll get it. We don't have the capacity to respond to every question, but where we see questions that we're receiving consistent feedback on, we will try to answer those in FAQs. So before, one of the things that we received questions on are, some typographical errors in the notice itself. So there were two errors. One, the point totals required for annual application approval and conditional conversion application approval. So those are being the annual has been updated already. The conversion is being updated. The scoring categories were correct. The point totals for those categories were correct. It's just the totals for those two application types were incorrect. And so those have been updated and are available on our website. And finally, there was one regulatory citation that was missing a 1. So that has also been fixed and it is noted on our website, which you can see, you can access, you can see what those corrections are. So a lot of questions on what qualifies, what doesn't for inclusion in the cap of 37 cultivators. As I noted before, in order to be included in that category, you essentially need to go through the entire process as quickly as possible and get to that, essentially get that license issued. Per the statute, we can only issue 37 licenses or have 37 licenses issued and that are also operational prior to that deadline. But we can certainly accept applications in excess of that 37 number and move people through the process in excess of that number. They just can't be licensed and fully operational. And again, that deadline is a little over about a year and 3 months from today. So the 37 cultivators could include any ATCs that qualify as an expanded ATC that's certified to the commission and are licensed and get a cultivation license. They would in fact be one of those 37. if they do so before that deadline. It would include any converted conditional licenses. So if a conditional applicant moves through and files a conversion application and is approved and gets a license and becomes operational, they will be included within that 37. Does not include micro businesses. By statute, micro businesses are excluded. So if there's a micro business either issued an annual license via the conditional process or via the annual process, they will not be included. And it does not include conditional license holders that have not converted to annual. Again, the statute is clear. In order to be one of those 37, you have to have been issued a license and be fully operational related to cannabis production or manufacturing or sales, which a conditional license holder cannot do. It does not include ATCs that have not expanded. So if there's an ATC that is operating in the medical market, has not expanded, has not been issued a Class 1 cultivation license, they are not included within that 37 number. Again, we're going to do this essentially by first in time. Those who are first in time to get issued a license and become operational, they're the ones, those are the license applicants who will qualify as one of the 37. And again, I just want to emphasize that that cap expires about a year and 3 months from, a little over a year and 2 months, 2 or 3 months from today. We received a number of questions about tax returns, two specifically. So one, for entities and individuals, do we want full tax returns or will we accept transcripts? We want to see the full tax returns required for applicants, persons of interest, entities of interest. That's what we're asking for as part of the application process. We did receive a number of questions from individuals about what they can submit if they're exempt from filing tax returns. And there, you could submit, if you filed one, a 1040EZ noting that you're exempt from federal income taxes, or if you don't have that or don't have that for either federal or state taxes, simply a certification noting that you are exempt in the year in question from filing taxes. We will accept that. These things will be looked at as part of the application process, and we will verify that they are truthful. But if you're exempt from filing, you can absolutely submit a certification just noting that you were exempt from filing in the previous tax year. We received a number of questions about the application materials themselves and whether or not they're subject to public disclosure. Importantly, per the statute, application materials are not subject to public disclosure, but I will note a couple things to consider. Number one, the commission by statute will be sharing some of the application materials with municipalities. We're going to have guidance to municipalities and license applicants on what exactly from the license application will be shared with municipalities, but there will be a chunk of the application that will be shared with the municipalities. And then additionally, we do see a fair amount of litigation, and some pieces of license applications can be required to be disclosed in litigation. But generally speaking, application materials received as part of the process are not subject to public disclosure. Some of the additional questions we received, people wanted to know what to include in their regulatory compliance plan for the conditional license application, noting concerns about meeting the page number requirement while also running through all the regulatory requirements. We're not looking for it in the conditional license application, at least. We're not looking for the end all be all on how you're going to comply with every specific regulation. We want to see what's your overall plan? What are you going to establish in your business to ensure you're constantly operating in compliance with our regulations? Definitely note, key provisions in the regs and how you intend to comply with them. But, overall, what's your compliance staffing look like? What does your QA QC process for regulatory compliance look like? These are some things that could be in that regulatory compliance plan. I'll note that conditional license applicants, as part of the conversion application, will need to submit those specific SOPs for regulatory compliance, just like an annual license applicant would. We received questions from potential testing laboratory applicants about ISO 17025 certification. They want to know, is ISO 17025 certification required as part of the application, or can they simply be in process? Per the regulations and per the notice, ISO 17025 certification is in fact required as part of the application. We received a number of questions about the 2,500 square feet requirement for micro businesses, and then also specifically for cultivators. The statute notes that there's an overall 2,500 square feet requirement for micro businesses across the board, and then for cultivators, it also notes that they're, essentially their cultivation area can't be over 2,500 square feet, and they can't have more than 1,000 plants. So the overall 2,500 square feet requirement is in fact there for micro business cultivators, even with that 2,500 square foot requirement for the cultivation portion as well. Again, I want to point to our rules and how we defined physical plant. Please review that. We did try to provide some flexibility for micro businesses, particularly for cultivators, with that definition of physical plant, so that we're not counting areas that are not specifically related to the cultivation, manufacturing, retailing of cannabis or cannabis items in how we would calculate those 2,500 square feet. So, got some questions on outdoor and how we would measure this 2,500 square feet, outdoor. Part of the reason we did that physical plant definition is to ensure that if you have, a larger outdoor property, you can portion off a section of that to meet the micro business specification and just keep the physical plant of the proposed cannabis business within the micro business requirements. So it can be on a larger property, but the physical plant of the micro business has to be 2,500 square feet or under. Received some questions about the SOPs that are required in the application process and how a licensed applicant could comply with some of the page limits. I'll note here that the SOPs that we're looking for are specific to regulatory compliance. So, we're less concerned with, are you going to grow hydroponically or aquaponically or, in soil, more so concerned with, how you're going to comply with all of our regulations related to cultivation. So, for the SOPs, licensed applicants should really focus in on regulatory compliance. What you're going to do to comply with the regulations that are pertinent to that particular scored criteria. Certainly where we ask for it, but we do want additional information. So please review the notice of application acceptance. But really, when thinking about which SOPs you need to submit as part of that process, it all comes back to regulatory compliance. That's what we're going to look at, because we want to know that the business, if issued a license, will be effective in compliance with our regulation. We also received some questions about cultivation tiers and how an applicant can choose them in the application, but then are assigned by commission staff later in the process. And this is really because, going back to the licensure process overall, the license application, it kicks off the process to licensure, and the issuance of the license is the final step. And so you could submit with a high cultivation tier, say you want to submit 75,000 square feet, but when you get to licensure, if you only have 10,000 square feet ready to go, then you're going to get assigned a cultivation tier based on what's ready for licensure. That's important for cultivators because, again, going back to the first in time approach to those 37 cultivators, you're going to want to move with what you can reasonably expect to get licensed. So, ideally, you want what you submit in the application to line up with what you think you can get licensed as part of that process. Cultivators can increase their tiers over time, but again, you can pick your cultivation tier in the application, but it will be assigned at licensure based on what's ready to be licensed. We received a number of questions about doing business as names, DBAs, and per our regulations, DBAs are prohibited. Cannabis businesses are required to be, advertised and operating under the name of the business itself. And then finally, we received some questions about qualifications. What qualifies somebody as a financial source or a management services contractor? Even some questions about whether or not you qualify as an owner or a passive investor or a principal. For these, it's just really important to do a deep review of what's in regulation. We define all these categories in our regulations, whether it's a management services contractor, a financial source, an owner, a principal, a passive investor. They are defined in regulation. And so review our regulations to see what you could potentially qualify as, and what your partners would qualify as, because that determines what they'll need to submit as part of the application process. Going back to the application process itself, there will be a portion of this process where, following the scoring of an application, once you get to the qualification investigation, criminal history background check, where, we will request information based on what we see in the application and, whether or not a financial source or a management services contractor or an owner or other individual qualifies for probity, and is required to submit additional documents that weren't required in the initial application. So as far as next steps, the required forms are going to be posted to our website. We're going to have additional application instructions, essentially a tutorial, walk you through in greater detail the application itself prior to December 15th, 2021. And then we're going to release a constantly evolving group of frequently asked questions on our website. So if you submitted a question in advance of this webinar and it wasn't answered today, do not fret. It will very possibly be answered in the future. Again, we're not going to have time to answer all of them, but where we do see, consistent confusion or consistent requests for clarification, those are the questions that we're going to try to answer in these FAQs. So keep checking our website. Going back to what Commissioner Del Cid said, review our regulations, review the notice of application acceptance, for potentially qualifying as a social equity business or an impact zone business, review the economically disadvantaged areas and impact zones on our website. Both are posted on our website. And then continue to check back on our website just generally for updates. Follow our social media accounts because we're preparing on our end to get ready for this application process, and we want to make sure it's a smooth process for all involved. So with that, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for watching this video, and really look forward to moving this process forward and moving expediently to establish a equitable and safe recreational cannabis industry in the state of New Jersey. Thank you.